A single father's split-second decision to save a bride from her obsessed ex turned a perfect wedding into a bloodbath. But what happened next will restore your faith in humanity. A stranger took bullets meant for love, and in return, love gave him everything he never knew he needed. Stay with me until the very end of this incredible true story, and comment below which city you're watching from, so I can see how far this tale of sacrifice and redemption has traveled across the world. The summer heat pressed down on Chicago like a suffocating blanket, turning the elegant riverside manor into a furnace despite its grand facade. Ethan Cole wiped the sweat from his brow as he adjusted his tool belt, the metal buckle scorching against his weathered hands. At 34, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who'd learned that life's hardest lessons often came without warning. His dark hair was streaked with premature silver stress lines that told the story of sleepless nights and endless worry. "Mr. Cole, the AC unit on the third floor is acting up again," called Maria, the hotel's head of maintenance, her voice echoing through the marble-lined corridor. "The wedding party is getting restless." Ethan nodded, shouldering his equipment bag. "I'll handle it." As he climbed the ornate staircase, the sounds of celebration drifted from the ballroom below, laughter, clinking glasses, the soft melody of a string quartet. It was the kind of joy he remembered from another lifetime before Emma's mother died in that car accident 3 years ago, leaving him to raise their 6-year-old daughter alone. Before medical bills and funeral expenses drained their savings. Before he learned that love could be both the most beautiful and most fragile thing in the world. The third floor was quieter, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the hotel's manicured gardens. Ethan found the malfunctioning unit tucked behind an alcove, its gentle hum replaced by an ominous grinding sound. He knelt beside it, unscrewing the access panel with practiced efficiency. "Emma's waiting for me at Mrs. Patterson's," he muttered to himself, checking his watch. It was already past 4 o'clock, and he'd promised his daughter he'd pick her up by 6. The elderly neighbor was kind enough to watch Emma after school, but Ethan hated imposing on her generosity more than necessary. As he worked, replacing a worn bearing in the fan motor movement in the garden below caught his eye. Through the window, he could see the wedding ceremony in full swing. The bride stood radiant in flowing white silk, her veil catching the late afternoon sunlight like spun gold. Her groom, tall and distinguished in his black tuxedo, held her hands as the officiant spoke words that Ethan could barely hear through the glass. For a moment, Ethan paused in his work, captivated by the scene. The bride was stunning, not just in the way all brides were beautiful, but with a luminous quality that seemed to make everything around her shine brighter. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and even from this distance, Ethan could see the joy radiating from her face as she gazed at her soon-to-be husband. "Isabella Martinez weds Jonathan Blackwood," he read from a discarded program that had blown against the window. "Must be nice," he whispered, thinking of Emma's constant questions about why other kids had mommies and daddies while she only had him. The ceremony was reaching its crescendo. The officiant raised his hands, and the couple leaned in for what would surely be their first kiss as husband and wife. Guests rose to their feet, phones and cameras ready to capture the magical moment. That's when Ethan saw him. A figure in black emerged from the tree line at the far edge of the garden, moving with predatory purpose toward the assembled wedding party. Even from 3 stories up, Ethan could see the man's jerky, erratic movements, the kind that spoke of someone operating on rage and desperation rather than reason. The figure raised his hand, and sunlight glinted off metal. "Jesus Christ!" Ethan breathed, his blood turning to ice. The man in black was maybe 50 yards from the wedding party, cutting across the manicured lawn with determined strides. In his right hand, he clutched what was unmistakably a pistol, held low but ready. None of the guests had noticed him yet. They were all focused on the bride and groom, lost in the romance of the moment. Ethan's mind raced. Call security. The hotel's security office was on the first floor, and even if he could reach them by phone, they'd never make it in time. Call the police, same problem by the time they arrived. Whatever this maniac had planned would already be over. The man was 40 yards away now, and Ethan could make out more details. He was tall and lean, wearing all black jeans, black t-shirt, black baseball cap, pulled low over his eyes. His face was contorted with an emotion that even from this distance looked like pure hatred. 30 yards. The bride and groom were exchanging rings, now completely oblivious to the danger approaching from behind the gathered guests. Isabella's laugh carried on the breeze as her new husband fumbled with the delicate band, nearly dropping it in his nervousness. 20 yards. Ethan abandoned his tools and sprinted for the staircase, taking the steps 3 at a time. His work boots pounded against the marble as he flew down to the second floor, then the first, his heart hammering against his ribs. The elevator would be too slow. He needed to get outside, needed to warn them, needed to do something. But even as he ran, a cold voice in the back of his mind whispered the truth he didn't want to acknowledge. He wasn't going to make it in time. The hotel's main entrance opened onto a different side of the building from where the wedding was taking place. By the time he could circle around to the garden, it would all be over. Whatever was about to happen would happen, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do to stop it. Except there was one thing. Ethan skidded to a halt in the lobby, his eyes darting toward the ballroom's French doors that led directly onto the garden patio. He could see the back rows of wedding guests through the glass, could see the couple at the altar just beyond them, and he could see the man in black now close enough that individual guests were starting to notice him, their heads turning with expressions of confusion rather than alarm. They didn't understand what they were seeing. To them, he probably just looked like a latecomer to the ceremony, someone who'd gotten the dress code wrong. But Ethan could see the gun more clearly now, could see the way the man's finger rested on the trigger guard, could see the cold determination in his posture. "Sir, excuse me, sir." A hotel employee stepped into Ethan's path, clipboard in hand. "The ballroom is reserved for a private event." Ethan didn't slow down. He shoulder-checked the man aside, sending him stumbling into a potted palm, and burst through the French doors onto the patio. The late afternoon air hit him like a wall thick with humidity, and the scent of roses from the hotel's garden beds. The wedding guests turned at the sound of the doors slamming open, their faces registering surprise and mild annoyance at the interruption. "Gun!" Ethan shouted, pointing toward the approaching figure. "He's got a gun!" For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The bride and groom froze mid-kiss, the officiant's mouth hanging open, 200 wedding guests turning to stare at the sweaty maintenance worker who'd just crashed their perfect moment. Then the man in black raised his weapon, and chaos erupted. Screams tore through the air as guests dove for cover behind chairs and decorative planters. The bride's dress billowed around her as her new husband pulled her down, both of them disappearing behind the altar's white-draped table. But Ethan was already moving his work boots, finding purchase on the manicured grass as he sprinted across the garden. The gunman was turning toward him now, dark eyes visible beneath the brim of his cap, and Ethan could see his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than Ethan had expected, maybe late 20s, with the kind of lean, angular features that might have been handsome under different circumstances. But there was something broken in his expression, something desperate and unhinged that transformed his face into a mask of barely controlled violence. "Stay back," the gunman shouted, swinging the pistol toward Ethan. "This doesn't concern you." Ethan didn't slow down. 20 feet separated them now, then 15, then 10. He could see the man's finger tightening on the trigger, could see the exact moment when the decision was made. The world seemed to shift into slow motion as Ethan launched himself forward in a desperate tackle. He heard the sharp crack of the gunshot, felt something hot and angry tear through his shoulder, but his momentum carried him forward. His body slammed into the gunman's torso, sending them both crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs. Pain exploded through Ethan's left side as they hit the grass, but adrenaline kept him moving. The gun had been knocked loose in the collision, skittering several feet away across the lawn. Ethan rolled, trying to pin the other man down, but his opponent was younger and faster, fueled by whatever madness had driven him here. "You don't understand," the gunman snarled, throwing an elbow that caught Ethan in the jaw. "She was supposed to be mine. We were supposed to be together." Stars burst across Ethan's vision as his head snapped back, but he held on, wrapping his arms around the other man's waist to keep him from reaching the weapon. Blood was soaking through his work shirt, now warm and sticky against his skin. "Let me go." The man twisted frantically, his fingernails clawing at Ethan's face. "You don't know what she did to me, what she put me through." Through his blurred vision, Ethan could see wedding guests huddled behind overturned tables and scattered chairs. Some were on their phones, presumably calling 911, while others simply stared in shock at the violence that had shattered their celebration. And there behind the altar, he could see the bride Isabella peering over the edge of the white tablecloth that covered her impromptu shelter. Her veil had come loose during the chaos, dark hair now framing a face pale with terror. But her eyes weren't focused on the gun lying in the grass, or even on the two men wrestling just yards away from her. She was staring directly at Ethan, and in her gaze he saw something that cut through the pain and fear and adrenaline recognition of what he was doing and why. The gunman made another desperate lunge for his weapon, breaking free of Ethan's weakening grip. Ethan's shoulder was on fire now, his left arm increasingly useless as blood loss began to take its toll. But as the other man scrambled across the grass, Ethan summoned the last of his strength and grabbed the man's ankle, sending him sprawling once more. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan gasped, his voice barely audible over the continued screams and shouts around them. "She's married now. It's over." The gunman's face contorted with rage and heartbreak in equal measure. "Over, it'll never be over. Do you know what we had, what she threw away for him?" He gestured wildly toward the altar where Jonathan Blackwood was shielding his new bride. 2 years we were together. 2 years of promises and plans and she moved on," Ethan said, trying to inject as much calm authority into his voice as he could manage. "People do that. It's part of life." "Not her." The man's voice cracked like a teenager's. "Not Isabella. She said she loved me. She said we'd be together forever." Ethan could see hotel security guards finally arriving, running across the garden with radios crackling, but they were still too far away, and the gun was only inches from the gunman's outstretched fingers. "What's your name?" Ethan asked, shifting his weight to keep the other man pinned down despite his own weakening condition. "Marcus," the gunman replied, momentarily thrown by the question. "Marcus Reeves." "Marcus, I'm Ethan. I have a little girl, Marcus. Her name is Emma, and she's 6 years old." Blood was running down Ethan's face now from the cut on his jaw, but he kept talking. "She's waiting for me to pick her up from her babysitter's house. She's probably watching cartoons right now, maybe coloring in one of those books with the princesses." "I don't care about your kid," Marcus snarled, but some of the fire had gone out of his voice. "She already lost her mom in a car accident," Ethan continued. "If something happens to me today, she'll be alone, completely alone. Is that what you want? To make a little girl an orphan?" For just a moment, Marcus's face softened. For just a moment, the humanity beneath the madness seemed to surface. But then his gaze shifted to the altar, where Isabella was still crouched with her new husband, and the rage returned with doubled intensity. "She should have thought about that before she destroyed my life," he whispered, and his hand closed around the grip of the pistol. Everything happened at once. Marcus rolled onto his back, bringing the gun up toward the altar. Ethan threw himself forward, his wounded shoulder screaming in protest as he tried to knock the weapon aside. The security guards shouted warnings as they closed the final distance, and then the world exploded in thunder and fire. The second gunshot was much louder than the first, a sharp crack that seemed to echo off the hotel's facade and roll across the garden like a physical force. Ethan felt something punch into his chest, just below his collarbone, spinning him sideways and sending him crashing to the grass. The third shot followed a heartbeat later, this one catching him in the abdomen and folding him over like a broken doll. Hot copper flooded his mouth as he hit the ground, his vision already starting to tunnel at the edges. Through the growing darkness, he could hear Marcus screaming, not in triumph, but in horror, as if he'd only now realized what he'd done. The security guards were on him now, wrestling the gun away and forcing him to the ground with professional efficiency. But Ethan barely registered any of that. His world had shrunk to a few square feet of bloodied grass and the sound of running footsteps approaching from multiple directions. He tried to sit up, tried to speak, but liquid fire was spreading through his torso, and his limbs felt disconnected from his body. "Oh God, oh God, oh God!" The voice was female, soft and musical, even in its panic. Gentle hands touched his face, and through his blurred vision, he saw Isabella Blackwood, kneeling beside him, her wedding dress spreading around them like a white cloud. Her veil was completely gone now, dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. Tears streamed down her cheeks, cutting tracks through her carefully applied makeup, and there was blood, his blood on her hands, and the front of her dress. "Why did you do that?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why did you help us? You don't even know us." Ethan tried to answer, tried to explain about doing the right thing, about protecting innocent people, about how he couldn't just stand by and watch. But all that came out was a wet cough that sent more blood spilling from his lips. "Paramedics are on the way," Jonathan Blackwood said, dropping to his knees beside his wife. His tuxedo was rumpled and grass-stained, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck. "Just hold on, man. Help is coming." Ethan managed to croak the word barely audible. "My daughter." "What?" Isabella leaned closer, her ear almost touching his lips. "What did you say, Emma?" he whispered. 6 years old, at Mrs. Patterson's house on Elm Street, number 47. If I can't. Understanding dawned in Isabella's eyes, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Don't you dare," she said fiercely. "Don't you dare give up on her. She needs you. Take care." Ethan's vision was fading fast now, the edges of the world growing soft and gray. "Please, we will," Isabella promised, her voice firm despite her tears. "I swear to you we will." The last thing Ethan saw before consciousness slipped away was Isabella's face hovering above his backlit by the golden afternoon sun, like some kind of angel. Her lips were moving, but he could no longer hear the words. The world was going quiet, the pain was fading, and somewhere in the distance he thought he could hear Emma calling his name. But maybe that was just wishful thinking. Maybe that was just a father's heart refusing to let go even as everything else surrendered to the dark. The sirens were getting closer now, their wailing song cutting through the afternoon air. Soon there would be paramedics and stretchers, police reports and crime scene tape. Soon there would be questions that needed answers and forms that needed signatures. But for now, in this suspended moment between crisis and resolution, There was only a bloodied maintenance worker lying in the grass, a bride and groom whose perfect day had become something else entirely, and the echo of 3 words that would bind their lives together in ways none of them could yet imagine. Take care, please. The wedding at Riverside Manor was over, but the story it had begun was just getting started. The ambulance screamed through Chicago's crowded streets, its red and blue lights painting the evening shadows in urgent colors. Isabella sat pressed against the vehicle's wall, still in her blood-stained wedding dress, watching the paramedics work over Ethan's motionless form. His face was gray beneath the oxygen mask monitors beeping erratically as his body fought to stay alive. Lost a lot of blood, one of the paramedics muttered to his partner. 3 gunshot wounds possible, punctured lung BP dropping fast. Jonathan squeezed his wife's hand, his own formal wear disheveled and wrinkled. They should have been cutting cake by now, should have been dancing their first dance as husband and wife. Instead, they were racing toward Chicago General Hospital with a dying stranger who had saved their lives. "What was that address he gave you?" Jonathan whispered. 47 Elm Street, Isabella replied without hesitation. Emma, 6 years old, Mrs. Patterson's house. The ambulance lurched around a corner, and one of the monitors let out a sharp alarm. Isabella watched the paramedic's face tighten as he adjusted something on Ethan's chest, fingers moving with practiced urgency. "Come on, buddy," the medic murmured. "Stay with us. Don't give up now." But Ethan's breathing was growing more labored, his skin taking on an ashen pallor that made Isabella's heart clench. She had seen death before her grandfather, her college roommate's mother, and she recognized the signs. This man who had thrown himself between her and a madman's bullets was slipping away, and there was nothing any of them could do except pray. The hospital's emergency entrance rushed past in a blur of fluorescent lights and urgent voices. Within seconds, Ethan was surrounded by a team of trauma surgeons and nurses, his gurney disappearing through swinging doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Isabella and Jonathan found themselves standing alone in the waiting area. The sudden silence almost deafening after the chaos of the ambulance ride. Other families clustered in uncomfortable plastic chairs, their faces etched with worry and exhaustion. The air smelled of disinfectant and anxiety. "Mrs. Blackwood." A police detective approached, flipping open a worn notebook. "Detective Sarah Martinez, Chicago PD. I know this is a difficult time, but I need to get your statement about what happened." Isabella nodded numbly, sinking into one of the chairs. Her wedding shoes pinched her feet, and there was dried blood under her fingernails, Ethan's blood. The detective's questions came in a steady stream. How well did she know Marcus Reeves? When was the last time they'd spoken? Had she felt threatened by him recently? "We dated for almost 2 years. Isabella admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It ended 8 months ago when I met Jonathan. Marcus, he didn't take it well." "Define didn't take it well," Detective Martinez pressed gently. Isabella closed her eyes, remembering the increasingly desperate phone calls the Flowers delivered to her office every day for 3 weeks, the way Marcus would show up at her favorite coffee shop, or the gym always with some excuse about why he just happened to be there. "He kept saying we belonged together," she said. "That Jonathan was just a phase, that I'd come back to him eventually. He sent letters, emails, text messages. My friend said I should get a restraining order, but I thought he'd eventually give up and move on." "Any specific threats?" the detective asked. "Not exactly threats, more like promises. He said he'd wait for me forever, that no one else would ever love me the way he did. He said if he couldn't have me, he'd make sure no one else could either." Isabella's voice broke. "I should have taken it more seriously." I should have. This is not your fault, Jonathan said firmly, moving his chair closer to hers. Marcus Reeves made his own choices. You can't blame yourself for his actions. Detective Martinez continued taking notes, but Isabella's attention drifted to the surgical doors. How long had it been? An hour, 2 hours? Time seemed to move differently in hospitals, stretching and contracting, like a rubber band. There's something else, Isabella said suddenly. Ethan, the man who saved us, he has a daughter. Emma, 6 years old. She's at a babysitter's house on Elm Street. If he doesn't make it. She couldn't finish the sentence. The detective's expression softened. We'll send someone to check on her. Make sure she's safe. But Isabella was already standing, her decision made. No, we're going. Jonathan and I were going to get her. Bella, we should stay here, Jonathan protested. Wait for news about his condition. That little girl is sitting at a babysitter's house wondering why her father hasn't come to pick her up. Isabella said, her voice gaining strength. If when Ethan wakes up, the first thing he's going to ask about is Emma, I'm not going to tell him we just left her there. Jonathan studied his wife's face, seeing the determination that had first attracted him to her. Okay, he said. Let's go get her. The drive to Elm Street took 20 minutes through Chicago's evening traffic. Isabella sat in the passenger seat of Jonathan's BMW, still wearing her wedding dress, trying to figure out what she would say to a 6-year-old girl whose world was about to be turned upside down. 47 Elm Street was a modest 2-story house with a well-maintained garden and a tire swing hanging from an old oak tree. Through the front window, they could see the warm glow of lamps and the flickering blue light of a television. Patterson answered the door on the second ring, a woman in her 70s with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She took one look at Isabella's blood-stained dress and Jonathan's formal wear and immediately understood that something terrible had happened. Oh, dear Lord, she whispered. Ethan. He's in surgery, Isabella said quickly. He's alive, but it's serious. We came for Emma. Mrs. Patterson's hand flew to her chest. Emma. She's been asking about her daddy for the past 2 hours. I kept telling her he must be running late from work, but... She stepped aside to let them in. She's in the living room watching cartoons. The house smelled of homemade cookies and lavender air freshener. Family photos covered the mantelpiece and handmade crafts that were clearly Emma's work decorated a nearby bookshelf. It was the kind of home that spoke of decades of love and laughter. Emma Cole was curled up on the sofa in pink pajamas covered with unicorns, her dark hair pulled into pigtails that had gone slightly lopsided during the day. She looked up when they entered, her father's green eyes taking in the strangers with cautious curiosity. Are you friends of my daddy? She asked, muting the television, with a remote that looked comically large in her small hands. Isabella's heart clenched. The little girl was beautiful, all wide eyes and innocent trust, the kind of child who still believed that adults could fix anything, that parents always came home at the end of the day. Yes, sweetheart, Isabella said, kneeling down so they were at eye level. My name is Isabella, and this is my husband, Jonathan. We met your daddy today. Is he coming to pick me up soon? Emma asked, glancing toward the window where darkness was beginning to settle. He promised we'd have pizza for dinner and watch a movie. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes, but she forced herself to stay calm. Emma, your daddy had to go to the hospital today. He got hurt, but the doctors are taking very good care of him. Emma's expression grew serious, the way children's faces do when they sense that the adult world is about to intrude on their safe bubble. Is he going to die, like Mommy did? The question hit Isabella like a physical blow. She glanced at Mrs. Patterson, who nodded grimly. Sarah died in a car accident 3 years ago, the older woman explained quietly. Emma was only 3, but she remembers. Isabella turned back to Emma, choosing her words carefully. The doctors are working very hard to make sure your daddy gets better. But he might have to stay at the hospital for a while, which means you can't go home tonight. Can I stay with Mrs. Patterson? Emma asked, looking between the adults with growing anxiety. Actually, Isabella said, surprised by her own words, we were hoping you might want to come stay with us for a little while. Just until your daddy is feeling better. Jonathan's eyebrows shot up, but he didn't contradict her. Mrs. Patterson looked relieved. Caring for a grieving 6-year-old was probably more than she'd bargained for when she agreed to watch Emma after school. I don't know you, Emma said with the blunt honesty of childhood. You're absolutely right, Isabella agreed. You don't know us at all. But your daddy helped us today when we really needed help, and now we want to help him by taking care of you. Would that be okay? Emma considered this for a long moment, her small face scrunched up in concentration. Will you tell me stories before bed? Daddy always tells me stories. I would love to tell you stories, Isabella promised. And can I call my daddy on the phone? As soon as the doctors say it's okay, yes. Emma nodded solemnly. Okay, but I need to pack my backpack. And Mr. Whiskers has to come too. She pointed to a well-loved teddy bear sitting on the coffee table. 20 minutes later, they were driving back toward downtown Chicago, with Emma buckled into the back seat, clutching Mr. Whiskers and a small purple backpack. She had been remarkably calm during the packing process, following Mrs. Patterson around the house and carefully selecting clothes and toys with the methodical precision of a child who had learned early that life could change without warning. Are you really married? Emma asked suddenly, studying Isabella's disheveled wedding dress in the rearview mirror. We got married today, Jonathan replied. Just a few hours ago, actually. Why is your dress all dirty? Isabella twisted in her seat to look back at Emma. Remember how I told you that your daddy got hurt helping us? Well, I sat with him while we waited for the ambulance to come. I wanted to make sure he wasn't scared. Emma processed this information with the seriousness of a child who understood more about loss and fear than most adults. Daddy says that when people get hurt, it's important to stay with them so they don't feel alone. Your daddy is a very smart man, Isabella said softly. They stopped at a 24-hour pharmacy to buy basic necessities, a toothbrush, pajamas, underwear, the kind of things you needed when your life suddenly veered off course. Emma held Isabella's hand as they walked through the brightly lit aisles, her small fingers warm and trusting. Can we get ice cream? She asked, stopping in front of the frozen food section. It's almost bedtime, Jonathan started to say, but Isabella cut him off. I think ice cream sounds perfect. They ended up in Isabella and Jonathan's downtown penthouse apartment at nearly 10 o'clock, sitting around the kitchen island eating mint chocolate chip ice cream out of coffee mugs, while Emma told them about her first-grade teacher, her best friend Lily, and how her daddy always let her put extra marshmallows in her hot chocolate. This is a really big house, Emma observed, looking around at the modern furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. It's an apartment, Jonathan corrected gently. We live very high up in a tall building. Like a princess tower. Exactly like a princess tower, Isabella agreed, smiling for what felt like the first time all day. When Emma finally started yawning, Isabella helped her brush her teeth and change into new pajamas, purple ones with stars and moons that had caught the little girl's eye at the pharmacy. The apartment's guest room had been converted into Jonathan's home office, but they quickly moved furniture around to make space for Emma's sleeping bag on the floor. Will you tell me a story now? Emma asked, settling into her makeshift bed with Mr. Whiskers tucked under her arm. Isabella sat on the edge of the office chair, her wedding dress pooling around her feet. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and still wearing the same clothes she'd put on that morning for what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. But looking down at Emma's expectant face, she felt something shift inside her chest, a protective instinct she hadn't known she possessed. Once upon a time, Isabella began, there was a brave knight who lived in a kingdom where dragons had been causing trouble. As she spun the tale, weaving together elements from half-remembered fairy tales and her own imagination, Emma's eyelids grew heavy. The little girl fought sleep for as long as she could, clearly worried that closing her eyes might mean waking up to discover that her father was gone forever. "The night will be okay, right?" Emma mumbled, already half asleep. "The night will be fine," Isabella promised. "Knights are very strong and very brave, and they always find their way back to the people who love them." When Emma's breathing finally evened out into the deep rhythm of sleep, Isabella remained sitting beside her for several more minutes, watching the rise and fall of the small chest, the way her fingers stayed curled around the teddy bear's worn fur. Jonathan appeared in the doorway, having changed out of his tuxedo into jeans and a sweater. "She's asleep." Isabella nodded carefully, getting to her feet. "Finally." "She's terrified, Jonathan. She's trying to be brave, but she's absolutely terrified." They moved into the living room, where Isabella finally allowed herself to collapse onto the leather sofa. The events of the day crashed over her all at once, the gunshots, the blood, the feeling of Ethan's life slipping away under her hands, the responsibility that now rested on their shoulders. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered. "This morning we were worried about whether the flowers would match the tablecloths, and now we're caring for the daughter of a man who might die because he saved our lives." Jonathan finished quietly. Isabella looked up at her husband, seeing her own shell-shocked expression reflected in his eyes. "Are we doing the right thing, taking her in like this?" "I don't know," Jonathan admitted. "But I know we couldn't just leave her with that elderly woman in foster care." He shrugged. "This feels right. Scary as hell, but right." Isabella's phone buzzed with a text message. The hospital. "Patient update: Ethan Cole is out of surgery and stable. Visiting hours resume at 8 a.m. "He made it through," Isabella said, showing Jonathan the screen. "He's stable." Relief flooded through her, so intense she felt lightheaded. Somewhere in the city, in a sterile hospital room, Ethan Cole was breathing on his own again. His heart was beating, his blood was circulating, his body was fighting its way back to life. "We should try to get some sleep," Jonathan said. "Tomorrow's going to be another long day." But as they prepared for bed, Isabella found herself thinking about Emma's question. "Will you tell me stories before bed?" Such a simple request, yet it highlighted how much this little girl had already been through, how much she was going to need in the coming weeks and months. In their bedroom, as Isabella finally peeled off her ruined wedding dress, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. Her hair was a mess, her makeup had long since smeared away, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She looked nothing like the radiant bride who had walked down the aisle just 12 hours earlier. "Regrets?" Jonathan asked softly, coming up behind her and resting his hands on her shoulders. Isabella leaned back against his chest, considering the question seriously. Their wedding had been destroyed, their honeymoon canceled, their carefully planned future suddenly complicated by the needs of a traumatized child. Any reasonable person would have regrets. "No," she said finally. "Not for a second." Jonathan kissed the top of her head. "Good. Because I have a feeling our life just got a whole lot more interesting." Neither of them slept well that night. Isabella found herself getting up every hour to check on Emma creeping into the office to make sure the little girl was still breathing, still safe. Each time she found Emma exactly as she'd left her, curled up with Mr. Whiskers, dark hair spread across the pillow, small face, peaceful in sleep. At 6 in the morning, Isabella was awakened by the sound of quiet sobbing. She found Emma sitting up in her sleeping bag, tears streaming down her cheeks, as the reality of the situation hit her with the cruel clarity of daylight. "Hey, sweetie," Isabella murmured, kneeling beside the crying child. "It's okay. You're safe." "I want my daddy," Emma hiccuped. "I want to go home." Isabella gathered the little girl into her arms, feeling the small body shake with sobs. "I know you do. And you're going to see him very soon, I promise. The doctors say he's feeling much better already." "What if he doesn't want me anymore?" Emma asked the question muffled against Isabella's shoulder. "What if he thinks I was bad because I wasn't there when he got hurt?" The question broke Isabella's heart. At 6 years old, Emma was already carrying guilt that no child should bear the same guilt Isabella had been wrestling with since the moment Marcus Reeves pulled that trigger. "Emma, look at me." Isabella gently lifted the little girl's chin. "Your daddy loves you more than anything in the whole world. Getting hurt was not your fault, and he would never, ever think you were bad. Do you understand me?" Emma nodded slowly, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Now," Isabella continued, "what do you say we make pancakes for breakfast? The really fluffy kind, with lots of syrup." For the first time since they'd met, Emma smiled a small, tentative expression that transformed her entire face. "Can we make them shaped like animals?" "I don't see why not," Isabella replied, even though she'd never made animal-shaped pancakes in her life. "What's your favorite animal?" "Butterflies," Emma said without hesitation. "Daddy says I'm his little butterfly because I'm always fluttering around." As they worked together in the kitchen, mixing batter and attempting to create butterfly-shaped pancakes on the griddle, Isabella found herself thinking about the chain of events that had brought them to this moment. If Marcus hadn't shown up at the wedding, if Ethan hadn't been working at the hotel, if he hadn't made the split-second decision to intervene, none of this would be happening. But it was happening, and with each passing hour, Isabella felt more certain that it was supposed to happen. Maybe not the violence, maybe not the trauma, but this taking care of Emma being part of something bigger than their own lives. This felt like destiny. The pancakes were lopsided, and more blob-shaped than butterfly-shaped, but Emma ate them with enthusiasm, syrup coating her fingers, and a milk mustache decorating her upper lip. Jonathan emerged from the bedroom wearing a suit and tie, clearly preparing for what would undoubtedly be a day full of phone calls and arrangements. "Work?" Isabella asked. "I'm going to see how much time I can take off," he replied. "This situation is going to need both of us, at least for the next few weeks." Isabella felt a rush of love for her new husband. In less than 24 hours, he had gone from being a successful businessman planning his honeymoon to a man willing to rearrange his entire life for a child he'd just met. After breakfast, they bundled Emma into the car and headed for Chicago General Hospital. The little girl had insisted on bringing a drawing she'd made that morning, a crayon picture of herself, her father, and 2 other stick figures she'd labeled Isabella and Jonathan. They were all holding hands under a bright yellow sun. The hospital's pediatric wing was designed to be cheerful and non-threatening, with colorful murals on the walls and child-sized furniture in the waiting areas. But Emma still clung to Isabella's hand as they walked toward Ethan's room, her small face pale with anxiety. "Remember, your daddy might look different than usual," Isabella explained gently. "He has some tubes and machines helping him get better, but that doesn't mean he's not the same daddy who loves you." They found Ethan in room 312, hooked up to monitors and IV lines, but blessedly awake and alert. His face was still pale, and there were dark circles under his eyes, but when he saw Emma in the doorway, his entire expression transformed. "Butterfly," he whispered, his voice rough from the breathing tube that had been removed just hours earlier. Emma hesitated for only a moment before rushing to his bedside, careful not to disturb the wires and tubes as she reached for his hand. "Daddy, I was so scared," Mrs. Patterson said. "You went to the hospital and I thought... The words tumbled out in a rush of relief and residual fear. "I'm okay, baby girl," Ethan assured her, squeezing her small fingers with what little strength he had. "I'm going to be just fine." His eyes met Isabella's over Emma's head, and she saw a depth of gratitude there that took her breath away. This man had risked everything for strangers, and now those same strangers had become his lifeline. "Thank you," he mouthed silently. Isabella simply nodded, her throat too tight for words. Outside the hospital window, Chicago was waking up to another day, but inside room 312, a new kind of family was taking its first tentative breaths. The real healing, Isabella knew, was just beginning. The machines surrounding Ethan's bed beeped steadily, a mechanical symphony that had become the soundtrack to their new reality. Emma sat curled up in the oversized hospital chair, her legs tucked beneath her as she colored in a princess coloring book Isabella had bought from the gift shop. For 3 days, this sterile room had become their second home, and somehow, against all odds, it was beginning to feel like a sanctuary. "Tell me about the butterfly again, Daddy," Emma said without looking up from her careful coloring, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she stayed within the lines. Ethan shifted carefully in his hospital bed, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. The doctors had removed one of his chest tubes that morning, declaring his recovery remarkably fast, though he still felt like he'd been hit by a freight train. "Well," he began, his voice still raspy but growing stronger each day. "When you were born, you were the tiniest little thing, no bigger than my hand. And your mama, she looked at you sleeping there in your bassinet, and she said you looked just like a butterfly, getting ready to emerge from its cocoon." "Because I was all wrapped up in the blanket," Emma added, having heard this story dozens of times but never tiring of it. "That's right, all wrapped up tight, just like a chrysalis. And your mama said, 'Ethan, our little girl, is going to grow up to be the most beautiful butterfly in the world.' And she was right, wasn't she?" Emma beamed, finally looking up from her coloring book. "Mama was always right about everything." Isabella, who had been quietly reading in the corner, felt her heart clench at the easy way father and daughter spoke about the woman they'd both lost. There was grief there, but it was the kind that had been processed and integrated into their daily lives, transformed from sharp pain into gentle remembrance. Jonathan appeared in the doorway, carrying a bag from Emma's favorite pizza place, still wearing his work clothes, despite having left the office early every day for the past week. The sight of him made Isabella's chest warm with affection. Her new husband had thrown himself into their unexpected family situation with the same dedication he brought to his business deals, though she suspected this particular arrangement was far more meaningful to him than any corporate merger. "Pizza delivery," he announced, setting the bag on the rolling table near Ethan's bed. "1 pepperoni, 1 cheese, and 1 with extra everything because someone said she was feeling adventurous today." "That's me," Emma said, scrambling out of her chair. "I'm the adventurous one." As they arranged the pizza boxes and settled into what had become their evening routine, Isabella marveled at how quickly they'd all adapted to this strange new normal. Jonathan had negotiated an extended leave from his law firm. Isabella had postponed her return to her marketing job, and somehow the four of them had fallen into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. "The physical therapist says I might be able to start walking tomorrow," Ethan said, accepting the slice of cheese pizza Isabella offered him. "Just to the hallway and back, but it's progress." "That's wonderful," Isabella replied, though part of her felt a flutter of anxiety at the words. Ethan's recovery meant he would eventually leave the hospital, and then what she and Jonathan had been so focused on getting through each day that they hadn't really discussed the future beyond vague promises to figure it out. "Where will we go when you get better, Daddy?" Emma asked, seemingly reading Isabella's thoughts. "Mrs. Patterson said she watered our plants, but she can't keep doing it forever." Ethan's expression grew troubled. "I know, Butterfly. We'll work something out. Maybe I can find a place closer to downtown, make it easier for Mrs. Patterson to help out when I'm working late." "But what about Isabella and Jonathan?" Emma asked with the devastating directness of childhood. "Are we not going to see them anymore?" The question hung in the air like smoke impossible to ignore. Isabella felt Jonathan's eyes on her, waiting for some kind of signal about how to respond. They had all been dancing around this conversation for days, the adults unable to voice what the child had stated so simply. "Emma," Ethan said carefully, "Isabella and Jonathan have their own lives. They've already done so much more than—" "We're not going anywhere," Isabella interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Not if you don't want us to." Ethan stared at her, something unreadable flickering across his features. "Isabella, you can't just—" "Can't just what?" she challenged gently. "Can't just care about what happens to you and Emma. Can't just want to make sure you're both okay. You have a marriage to figure out," Ethan said, his voice strained. "You should be on your honeymoon right now, not sitting in a hospital room eating pizza with a busted-up maintenance worker and his kid." The bitterness in his tone caught everyone off guard. Emma looked between the adults with wide, worried eyes, clearly sensing the shift in atmosphere, even if she didn't understand its source. "Is that what you think this is about?" Isabella asked quietly. "Pity, isn't it?" Ethan shot back, then immediately looked stricken by his own words. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," Isabella said, standing up and moving to the window that overlooked the hospital's courtyard. Below, she could see families coming and going, carrying flowers and balloons, some celebrating recovery, others saying goodbye. "And maybe you're right to think that. Maybe this did start as pity or guilt or some misguided sense of obligation." She turned back to face the room, her gaze moving from Ethan to Emma to Jonathan, all of them watching her with varying degrees of apprehension. "But that's not what this is anymore," she continued. "This is Emma teaching me how to make butterfly pancakes at 6 in the morning because she couldn't sleep. This is Jonathan reading bedtime stories in different voices because he discovered he's actually pretty good at character voices. This is the three of us sitting in this room every evening sharing pizza and talking about our days like a family." Emma had gone very still in her chair, pizza forgotten in her hands. Ethan was staring at Isabella with an expression she couldn't quite read, while Jonathan nodded slowly, as if her words were confirming something he'd been thinking, but hadn't known how to articulate. "But we're not a family," Ethan said softly. "Not really. You and Jonathan are married. Emma and I are—" "What?" Isabella challenged. "You're what less important because you're not blood related to us, less deserving of care because we haven't known you for years." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his fingers absently smoothing the hospital blanket across his lap. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I meant that people like you don't stick around for people like me, so Not in the real world. Not when things get complicated and messy and ordinary. The words hit Isabella like a physical blow, and she understood suddenly what this was really about. It wasn't about obligation or pity or any of the surface concerns Ethan had voiced. It was about fear, the bone-deep terror of someone who had already lost too much, who couldn't bear the thought of Emma getting attached to people who might disappear from their lives. "Daddy," Emma said quietly, and there was something in her voice that made all three adults turn to look at her. "Remember what you told me after Mama died, when I was scared that you might go away too?" Ethan's expression softened. "What did I tell you, Butterfly? You said that love doesn't have rules, that sometimes people come into your life in ways you don't expect, and sometimes they stay longer than you planned, and sometimes they become family even when they're not supposed to." Emma looked around the room with solemn eyes. "You said the important thing is to be brave enough to love people while they're here, even if you're scared they might leave." The silence that followed Emma's words was profound. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes, struck by the wisdom of a child who had learned lessons about love and loss that most adults spent decades figuring out. "You're right," Ethan said, finally reaching out to take Emma's hand. "You're absolutely right, Butterfly." He looked up at Isabella and Jonathan, and for the first time since she'd met him, Isabella saw something other than wariness in his expression. There was hope there, tentative and fragile, but real. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I'm scared of letting you in and then having to watch you leave. But I'm also scared of pushing you away and missing out on this." He gestured around the room, encompassing all of them. "Whatever this is." "It's a family," Emma said matter-of-factly. "That's what it is." Jonathan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the exchange, finally spoke up. "What would you need?" he asked Ethan. "I mean, practically speaking. If we were going to make this work long-term, what would you need?" Ethan blinked clearly, not expecting the conversation to turn toward logistics. I don't know. I hadn't really think about it now," Isabella encouraged, settling back into her chair. "What would make this sustainable for everyone?" Ethan was quiet for several minutes, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, as if he were afraid his words might shatter the fragile hope that had built up in the room. "I'd need to be able to contribute," he said. "I can't just let you take care of us financially. I have skills experience. I could work for Jonathan's firm doing building maintenance, or maybe start my own small business doing repairs and installations." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "The firm's building could actually use someone with your expertise on permanent staff, and there are several other properties in our portfolio that need regular maintenance. And housing," Ethan continued, warming to the topic. "Emma and I would need our own space, but maybe something close to where you live. So Emma could walk between the two places if she wanted, feel like she had options. There's a beautiful family townhouse 3 blocks from our apartment," Isabella said, her heart beginning to race with excitement. "It's been on the market for months. The owner might be willing to rent instead of sell, especially with good references." Emma had been following the conversation with increasing animation, her pizza now completely forgotten. "Does this mean we're really going to be a family?" she asked. "Like for real?" Isabella looked at Jonathan, seeing her own cautious optimism reflected in his eyes. They were talking about fundamentally restructuring their lives around a man and child they'd known for less than a week. By any rational standard, it was insane. But nothing about their situation had been rational from the beginning. A maintenance worker had taken bullets to save strangers at a wedding. A bride and groom had abandoned their honeymoon to care for his child. And now, against all odds, they were seriously discussing becoming a permanent family unit. There would need to be boundaries, Isabella said, slowly thinking out loud. Clear expectations about roles and responsibilities. Emma would need stability and consistency, especially when it comes to parenting decisions. I'm still her father, Ethan said firmly. I make the final decisions about her education, her health, her well-being. Of course, Jonathan agreed immediately. But we could be what aunt and uncle figures backup support when you need it. Partners, Emma piped up. Like how Mrs. Patterson has Mr. Patterson, and they help each other with everything. The adults exchanged glances, struck by the simplicity of the child's perspective. Partners. Not parents and step-parents, not guardians and wards, just people who had chosen to build a life together. There's something else, Ethan said hesitantly. Something I need to tell you before we go any further with this conversation. Isabella felt her stomach tighten with apprehension. What is it? The medical bills. Ethan said, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. The surgery, the hospital stay, the recovery. I have insurance, but it's basic coverage through my employer. The out-of-pocket costs are going to be enormous. I'm probably looking at bankruptcy, and that's before we even talk about the time I'll be out of work. That's not, Jonathan started to say, but Ethan held up a hand. Let me finish. I can't enter into any kind of arrangement with you knowing that I'm bringing debt and financial instability. It wouldn't be fair to any of us, especially Emma. Isabella felt a wave of relief so intense it made her lightheaded. After everything they'd been through, everything they'd discussed, he was worried about money. Ethan, she said gently, Jonathan and I aren't exactly struggling financially. The medical bills aren't going to be an issue. I can't let you. You're not letting us do anything, Jonathan interrupted. We're choosing to do it. There's a difference. But the debt will be paid off by the end of the month, Isabella said firmly. Consider it a wedding gift to ourselves. The gift of knowing that the man who saved our lives isn't drowning in medical bills because he chose to help strangers. Ethan stared at them both, his mouth opening and closing as if he were trying to find words for a situation that defied normal social boundaries. This is crazy, he finally said. All of it. The whole thing is completely insane. The best things usually are, Isabella replied with a small smile. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation, and Dr. Sarah Chen, Ethan's surgeon, peeked her head into the room. Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to check on how you're feeling this evening, Mr. Cole. Much better, Ethan said, and Isabella was struck by how true that seemed to be. Even in just the past hour, some of the tension had left his shoulders, and his color looked better than it had since the shooting. Excellent. Your recovery continues to exceed our expectations. If you keep progressing at this rate, we should be able to discharge you by the weekend. Really? Emma said, bouncing in her chair. Daddy can come home. Dr. Chen smiled at the little girl. He can, though. He'll need to take things easy for several more weeks. No heavy lifting, no strenuous activity, and he'll need help with daily tasks for a while. He'll have plenty of help, Isabella said, surprising herself with how natural the words sounded. After the doctor left, they finished their pizza in contemplative silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what the next few weeks would bring. Emma had climbed into Ethan's bed, careful to avoid his IV lines, and was showing him her latest drawing, a house with 4 stick figures standing in front of it, each labeled with their names. This is our new house, she explained seriously. It has a big kitchen for making pancakes, and a backyard for butterflies, and rooms for everyone. It's perfect, Butterfly, Ethan said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. As visiting hours drew to a close, Isabella helped Emma pack up her coloring books and crayons, while Jonathan gathered the empty pizza boxes. The routine of leaving had become familiar, but tonight felt different. Tonight they were leaving with plans and possibilities, rather than just hopes and uncertainty. "Isabella," Ethan called softly as she prepared to help Emma into her jacket. She turned, meeting his gaze across the small room. "Yes, thank you," he said simply, "for everything. For Emma, for the medical bills, for giving us a chance to be part of something bigger." Isabella felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you for letting us." As they walked through the hospital corridors toward the exit, Emma's small hand in hers, Isabella thought about the conversation they'd just had. In the space of an hour, they had gone from uncertainty to commitment, from fear to faith, from strangers thrown together by circumstance to people actively choosing to build a life together. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely unprecedented in her experience. But as they stepped out into the Chicago evening, Emma chattering excitedly about the house in her drawing, Isabella felt more certain than ever that they were making the right choice. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Jonathan contacted a real estate agent about the townhouse Isabella had mentioned, while she began the process of interviewing nannies and researching schools in their neighborhood. Emma, blissfully unaware of the logistical complexities her adults were navigating, spent her time making lists of everything she wanted in their new family house. "A swing set," she announced over breakfast on Thursday morning, adding another item to her ever-growing list. "And a garden for growing vegetables. And a really big bathtub, so Mr. Whiskers can take bubble baths with me." "Mr. Whiskers doesn't like bubble baths," Isabella pointed out with amusement. "He will when he tries them," Emma said, with unshakable 6-year-old logic. The townhouse, when they finally saw it that afternoon, exceeded even Emma's ambitious expectations. Built in the 1920s and recently renovated, it featured 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, a modern kitchen that opened onto a living area with original hardwood floors, and a small but charming backyard with an old oak tree perfect for a swing. "It's like the house from my drawing," Emma exclaimed, running from room to room with barely contained excitement. "Look, there's space for everyone." The master bedroom was clearly meant for Ethan, while Emma had already claimed the smaller room at the end of the hall, drawn by its window seat and built-in bookshelves. But it was the third bedroom that gave Isabella pause. It was set up as an office, but it was clearly designed to be a bedroom if needed. "For when Isabella and Jonathan want to sleep over," Emma explained matter-of-factly, having noticed Isabella's contemplation. Isabella exchanged a glance with Jonathan, both of them suddenly aware that Emma's understanding of their new family structure might be more complex than they'd realized. The rental negotiations went smoothly, helped by Jonathan's legal expertise and their ability to provide excellent references and a substantial security deposit. By Friday afternoon, they had signed a lease that would give Ethan and Emma a home beginning the following week. When they shared the news with Ethan that evening, his reaction was a mixture of gratitude and overwhelming emotion that left him temporarily speechless. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and discover this is all a dream," he said, finally accepting the house keys from Jonathan, with hands that shook slightly. "If it is, then we're all having the same dream," Isabella replied. Saturday morning brought Ethan's discharge from the hospital, an event that Emma had been anticipating with the excitement of a child on Christmas morning. She had packed and repacked her small backpack 3 times, had helped Isabella organize all of Ethan's get-well cards and flowers, and had insisted on wearing her fancy dress, a blue sundress with white flowers that she reserved for special occasions. The discharge process took longer than expected, involving consultations with multiple doctors' prescriptions to fill and detailed instructions for at-home care. By the time they finally wheeled Ethan out of the hospital in the mandatory wheelchair, the afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the parking lot. "I can walk, you know," Ethan protested mildly, as Jonathan helped him into the passenger seat of their car. "Hospital rules," Isabella said from behind the wheel. "No arguments." The drive to the townhouse took 20 minutes through Saturday traffic, Emma providing a running commentary from the back seat about everything they passed. She pointed out parks where they could have picnics, stores where they could buy ice cream, and at least 3 different buildings that she declared would be perfect for Daddy's new office. When they finally pulled up in front of the townhouse, Emma was out of the car before Isabella had fully engaged the parking brake, racing up the front steps with her backpack bouncing behind her. "Welcome home," Isabella said softly as she helped Ethan out of the car, noting how much effort the simple movement required, despite his determination to appear strong. The afternoon was spent in a flurry of unpacking and settling in. Isabella had arranged for basic furniture to be delivered earlier in the week: a bed for Ethan, a twin bed and dresser for Emma, a kitchen table and chairs, a couch and coffee table for the living room. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the house feel like a home rather than just an empty space. Emma threw herself into the task of organizing her new room with the methodical enthusiasm that Isabella was learning was characteristic of her approach to major life changes. She arranged her stuffed animals on the window seat, organized her books on the built-in shelves, and carefully placed her drawing supplies in the small desk that had come with the room. "This is the best room ever," she declared, flopping onto her new bed with a satisfied sigh. "Mr. Whiskers loves it too. He told me." Ethan, despite his obvious exhaustion, insisted on helping with the unpacking until Isabella and Jonathan finally ganged up on him and forced him to rest on the living room couch. He fell asleep within minutes, his face relaxed and peaceful in a way Isabella had never seen before. "He's going to be okay," Jonathan said quietly, joining Isabella in the kitchen as she began preparing dinner. "I hope so," she replied, though she wasn't entirely sure what okay would look like in their new reality. As evening approached, they found themselves gathered around the kitchen table for their first meal in the townhouse. Emma had insisted on using the fancy plates, a set of blue ceramic dishes Isabella had found at a local home goods store, and had folded napkins into what she claimed were butterfly shapes, though they looked more like abstract origami experiments. "This feels different," Ethan said as they shared the simple meal of grilled chicken and vegetables. "Being here in a real home instead of a hospital room." "Different how?" Isabella asked. Ethan considered the question. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. "More permanent, I guess. More real." In the hospital, it was easy to think of this as temporary, something that would end when I got discharged. But sitting here now, he gestured around the kitchen, taking in the sight of Emma's drawings already magneted to the refrigerator. Jonathan's jacket hung over the back of his chair, Isabella's purse on the counter. "This looks like a life." "It is a life," Emma said seriously. "It's our life." Later, after Emma had been tucked into her new bed with a story about brave knights and helpful dragons, the 3 adults found themselves sitting in the living room, sharing a bottle of wine and marveling at how much their lives had changed in just over a week. "I've been thinking," Isabella said, curling her legs under her on the couch, "about what happens next, practically speaking." "What do you mean?" Ethan asked from his position in the recliner. Isabella had insisted they buy for his recovery. "I mean the day-to-day logistics. You're going to need help for the next few weeks while you heal, but even after that, Emma's going to need consistent care when you're working. And Jonathan and I, we want to be part of that. but we need to figure out what that looks like. Jonathan leaned forward, setting his wineglass on the coffee table. I've been thinking about that too. What if we treated this like a business partnership, clear roles and responsibilities, regular check-ins, adjustments as needed? A business partnership for raising a child? Ethan asked, his eyebrows raised. Why not? Isabella said, warming to the idea. Businesses have partnerships all the time where different people bring different skills and resources to achieve a common goal. This isn't that different. Except the goal is Emma's happiness and well-being, Ethan pointed out. Exactly. Which makes it more important than any business deal any of us have ever been involved in. They talked late into the evening, mapping out schedules and responsibilities, discussing everything from school pickup arrangements to vacation planning to college savings accounts. It was a surreal conversation in many ways. Three people who had been strangers a week ago now planning a shared future with the seriousness of a board meeting and the intimacy of family. But as the evening wore on, Isabella found herself thinking that maybe that combination of seriousness and intimacy was exactly what their unusual family needed. They were choosing each other deliberately, with full awareness of what they were committing to rather than simply falling into traditional family roles by accident of birth or marriage. When Jonathan finally yawned and suggested they should head back to their apartment, Emma appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Are you leaving?" she asked, and there was something in her voice that made all three adults look up sharply. "Just for tonight, sweetheart," Isabella said gently. "We'll be back tomorrow morning." "But why can't you stay here? There's a whole room for you." Isabella felt her heart clench at the uncertainty in Emma's voice. The little girl had been through so much upheaval in recent days, and the thought of the adults she'd come to depend on leaving her even temporarily was clearly distressing. "Because Daddy needs to rest," Isabella explained, "and you need to get used to your new room." "I'm already used to it," Emma said with 6-year-old logic. "And Daddy can rest better if everyone's here. He always sleeps better when I'm close by." Isabella looked at Ethan, who was staring at his daughter with an expression of pure love mixed with exhaustion and uncertainty. "She's not wrong," he said quietly. "I do sleep better knowing she's close. And after everything that's happened." He didn't finish the sentence, but Isabella understood. After taking 3 bullets, meant for strangers, after nearly dying in surgery, after having his entire life turned upside down, Ethan wasn't ready to be separated from the people who had become his lifeline. "Okay," Isabella said, making a decision that surprised even her. "We'll stay tonight." Emma's face lit up with pure joy, and she scampered back upstairs to her room, calling down that she would get the guest room ready for them. "You don't have to do this," Ethan said, but there was relief in his voice that betrayed his words. "I know we don't have to," Jonathan replied, "but maybe we want to." As they settled in for their first night as a household, Isabella reflected on how much her definition of normal had shifted in just over a week. Normal now included tucking in a child who wasn't biologically hers, making sure a man she'd known for 8 days had taken his medication and sleeping in a guest room 3 blocks from her own apartment, because a 6-year-old needed the security of knowing her family was close. It was chaotic and complicated and completely outside anything she'd ever imagined her life would include. It was also, she realized as she drifted off to sleep to the sound of Emma's quiet breathing down the hall, exactly where she wanted to be. 3 weeks into their new arrangement, Isabella discovered that playing house with real people was infinitely more complex than any childhood game had prepared her for. She stood in the townhouse kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, simultaneously packing Emma's lunch, monitoring Ethan's physical therapy exercises in the living room, and fielding a work call from her phone pressed between her shoulder and ear. "No, I can't make the 10 o'clock meeting," she said into the phone while spreading peanut butter on bread with perhaps more force than necessary. "Can we reschedule for this afternoon?" Emma appeared at her elbow, already dressed for school, in the purple dress she'd insisted on wearing 3 days in a row. "Isabella, can you braid my hair like you did yesterday? Daddy can't do it right, because his arm still hurts." Isabella held up one finger to Emma while continuing her conversation. "Thursday would be perfect. Yes, I'll have the Morrison account projections ready by then." She hung up and immediately turned her attention to Emma's hair, her fingers working quickly through the dark strands. "There," she said, securing the braid with a butterfly hair tie. "Perfect for school." From the living room came the sound of Ethan's frustrated grunt as he attempted to lift his left arm above shoulder height for the 20th time that morning. His physical therapist had been clear about the importance of consistent exercise, but 3 weeks of limited movement had left him struggling with tasks that had once been effortless. "Need help?" Jonathan called from where he sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, as he worked through his own morning emails. "I've got it," Ethan replied through gritted teeth, though the strain in his voice suggested otherwise. Isabella finished Emma's lunch and zipped up her backpack, then moved into the living room where Ethan was attempting his prescribed arm rotations, with the determined grimace of a man who refused to accept limitations. "You're pushing too hard," she said, gently placing her hand on his good shoulder. "Dr. Chen said the mobility would come back gradually." "Gradually isn't fast enough," Ethan muttered, lowering his arm with obvious frustration. "I should be back at work by now. I should be able to do simple things like braid my daughter's hair or carry groceries or save people's lives by throwing yourself in front of bullets." Isabella interrupted, her tone sharper than she'd intended. "Because that's what got you here in the first place." Ethan looked up at her, something flickering in his eyes that might have been surprise or hurt. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant," Isabella said more softly. "But recovery takes time, and you're not in this alone anymore." Before Ethan could respond, Emma bounded into the room with her backpack on and Mr. Whiskers tucked under her arm. "Ready for school," she announced. "Can Mr. Whiskers come to show and tell today?" "What's show and tell about this week?" Jonathan asked, closing his laptop and reaching for his car keys. "Families," Emma said, her face bright with excitement. "I'm going to tell everyone about how our family got started when Daddy saved Isabella and Jonathan at their wedding, and how now we all live together and take care of each other." Isabella felt her chest tighten at the innocent enthusiasm in Emma's voice. In the 3 weeks since they'd moved into the townhouse, their unconventional arrangement had become perfectly normal in Emma's 6-year-old worldview. She talked about her family with the same matter-of-fact acceptance that other children talked about having 2 parents, or divorced parents, or any other family configuration. But Isabella knew that the adult world would be less accepting of their situation. There had already been awkward conversations with Emma's school about pickup authorizations, raised eyebrows from neighbors who couldn't quite figure out their relationship, and pointed questions from well-meaning friends who wondered when Isabella and Jonathan were planning to get back to normal. "Maybe leave Mr. Whiskers at home today," Ethan suggested diplomatically. "He might get nervous around all those other kids." "Okay," Emma agreed easily, setting the teddy bear on the couch. "But I'm still going to tell them about our family." As Jonathan prepared to drive Emma to school, Isabella caught Ethan watching his daughter with an expression of deep worry. "What's wrong?" she asked once they were alone. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the front window where they could see Jonathan helping Emma into the car. "She's getting too attached," he said finally. "To us, to this whole situation, to the idea that this is permanent." He turned to look at Isabella, his green eyes troubled. What happens when you and Jonathan decide you want your real life back? What happens to Emma when you realize that playing house with someone else's kid isn't as fun as you thought it would be? The words stung more than Isabella cared to admit, partly because they echoed fears she'd been trying to ignore. Is that what you think this is, playing house? Isn't it? Ethan challenged. You've been married for 3 weeks, Isabella. 3 weeks. You should be figuring out how to live with each other, not how to live with a traumatized 6-year-old and her broken father. Emma isn't traumatized, Isabella said firmly. She's resilient and brave and she's 6 years old and she's already lost her mother, Ethan interrupted. I won't let her lose anyone else she's come to depend on. The accusation hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that Isabella didn't want to examine too closely. Because the truth was, she had been wondering lately what their life would look like if they stepped back from this arrangement. She and Jonathan had talked about traveling, about trying to conceive their own children, about all the things young married couples were supposed to do. But every time she tried to imagine those conversations becoming reality, she came up against the image of Emma's face when she'd asked if they were leaving. The absolute trust in those green eyes, the assumption that the adults in her life would keep choosing to stay. What do you want me to say? Isabella asked quietly. That we'll be here forever, no matter what. That's not a promise anyone can make, Ethan. Not even biological parents. I know that, Ethan said, his voice rough. But Emma doesn't. She thinks love means never leaving. Maybe she's right. The words slipped out before Isabella could stop them, and she saw Ethan's eyes widen with surprise. Maybe she's right, she repeated more firmly. Maybe love does mean never leaving. Maybe it means choosing to stay even when things get complicated and messy and ordinary. Isabella, do you know what Jonathan and I talked about last night? She interrupted. We talked about whether we should convert the guest room into a home office for him so he doesn't have to drive downtown every day. We talked about which preschools in the neighborhood have the best music programs, because Emma mentioned wanting to learn piano. We talked about installing a security system because Emma still has nightmares sometimes about bad men with guns. Ethan stared at her, his expression unreadable. Those aren't the conversations of people who are playing house, Isabella continued. Those are the conversations of people who are planning a future together. Before Ethan could respond, Jonathan returned from the school drop-off, bringing with him the kind of crisp October air that hinted at the approaching Chicago winter. Emma's teacher wants to schedule a parent-teacher conference, he announced, shrugging out of his coat. Apparently, Emma's been telling some very interesting stories about her family situation. What kind of stories? Isabella asked, though she suspected she already knew. The kind where she refers to all 3 of us as her parents, Jonathan said with a wry smile. Mrs. Henderson is a bit confused about our household dynamics. Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. We should probably clarify that with her. Should we? Jonathan asked, settling into his usual chair at the kitchen table. Because I've been thinking about it, and I'm not sure what we would clarify. Both Isabella and Ethan turned to look at him, surprised by the serious tone in his voice. I mean, what are we exactly, Ma? Jonathan continued. We're not traditional step-parents because Isabella and I aren't Emma's biological parents' new spouses. We're not guardians because Ethan is very much present and capable. We're not just family friends because we live together and share parenting responsibilities. We're partners, Isabella said slowly, remembering Emma's simple explanation from weeks ago. We're people who chose to build a life together. Exactly, Jonathan agreed. So why should we apologize for that, or try to explain it away? Ethan looked between them, his brow furrowed. Because people will think it's strange. Because it's not normal. Since when do we care about normal? Isabella challenged. Nothing about our situation has been normal from the beginning. A man threw himself in front of bullets to save strangers. A bride and groom abandoned their honeymoon to care for his child. We're living proof that normal is overrated. Jonathan's phone buzzed with an incoming call, and he glanced at the screen with a frown. It's my office. I should take this. As Jonathan stepped into the other room to answer his call, Isabella found herself alone with Ethan, in the kind of charged silence that had been building between them for days. There were undercurrents to their relationship that neither of them had acknowledged, tensions that went beyond mere logistics and childcare arrangements. You're scared, Isabella said quietly. Of course I'm scared, Ethan replied. I'm terrified. Not just about Emma getting attached. You're scared about getting attached yourself. Ethan's jaw tightened. That's not... It is exactly that, Isabella interrupted. You're scared because this feels good. Because coming home to a family feels right. Because having people who care about you and Emma feels like something you want to keep. And what if I do want to keep it? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What if I've already gotten so used to having you and Jonathan in our lives that I can't imagine going back to the way things were before? The vulnerability in his admission took Isabella's breath away. In 3 weeks of living together, sharing meals and responsibilities and the intimate details of daily life, Ethan had remained carefully guarded about his own feelings. He spoke freely about Emma's needs, about his gratitude for their help, about the practical aspects of their arrangement. But he had never acknowledged the emotional reality of what was happening between all of them. Then don't go back, Isabella said simply. It's not that easy. Why not? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands clasped in his lap. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Because I'm already in love with you, he said quietly. Both of you, not romantically, he added quickly, but familiarly. The way you love people who become essential to your daily happiness. The way you love people who make your child laugh and feel safe and excited about her future. Isabella felt her heart clench at the raw honesty in his words. Ethan, and that terrifies me, he continued, because I've felt that kind of love before, and I've lost it before, and I don't know if I could survive losing it again. Isabella moved to sit on the coffee table directly in front of Ethan's chair, bringing them to eye level. What if you didn't have to lose it? Everyone loses people eventually. Eventually, yes, but not necessarily. Not if we're careful with each other. Not if we keep choosing each other every day. How can you be so sure? Isabella considered the question seriously. How could she be sure she'd known Ethan for less than a month? She'd been married to Jonathan for 3 weeks. By any rational standard, she should be the least sure person in the world about the future of their unconventional family. But when she searched her feelings honestly, she found a certainty that surprised her with its depth and clarity. Because I love you too, she said quietly. Both of you. Emma and you. Not the way I love Jonathan, but completely. The way you love people who change your life for the better, just by being in it. Jonathan appeared in the doorway, his phone call apparently finished, and both Isabella and Ethan turned toward him with expressions that made him pause. Everything okay? He asked clearly, sensing the emotional weight in the room. We were just talking about the future, Isabella said. About what we want this to be long-term. Jonathan moved to sit on the couch, his expression thoughtful. And what do we want it to be? Permanent. Ethan said the word coming out stronger than Isabella had expected. I want it to be permanent. If you'll have us. If we'll have you. Jonathan laughed, though there was emotion in his voice. Ethan, you and Emma have become the best part of our lives. The question is whether you'll have us. Over the next several hours, they had the kind of conversation that Isabella suspected most families never had explicitly, a detailed discussion about love and commitment and the practical realities of building a life together. They talked about money and child-rearing philosophies and holiday traditions and what would happen if one of them wanted to move or change careers or have more children. By the time they needed to pick Emma up from school, they had outlined the framework for a future that was unprecedented in Isabella's experience, but felt more right than anything she'd ever committed to. Emma bounded into the car that afternoon, full of stories about her day, but she stopped mid-sentence when she noticed the adults' expressions. Why does everyone look happy-sad? She asked, with the perceptive directness that continually amazed Isabella. What's happy-sad? Jonathan asked from the driver's seat. Like when you're happy about something but also want to cry. Like when we moved into the new house. Isabella twisted in the passenger seat to look back at Emma. We've been talking about our family today, about how we want to stay together for a very long time. Emma's face lit up with pure joy. Forever. As close to forever as we can manage, Isabella replied. Does that mean you're not going to go back to your apartment anymore? Isabella looked at Jonathan, who was watching her in the rearview mirror, with a raised eyebrow and a small smile. I think, she said slowly, it means we're going to officially make the townhouse home for all of us. Emma let out a whoop of excitement that made Jonathan laugh out loud. Can we paint my room? Can we get a dog? Can we have pancakes for dinner to celebrate? Yes, probably and definitely, Isabella replied, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. That evening, as they prepared pancakes for dinner in their kitchen, not the guest kitchen, not Ethan's kitchen, but their shared family kitchen, Isabella reflected on how much her definition of home had changed in such a short time. Home used to be a place and address, a collection of familiar objects arranged in pleasant ways. Now home was the sound of Emma's laughter echoing from the living room as she played a board game with Jonathan. Home was Ethan humming while he attempted to flip pancakes with his good hand, refusing offers of help with stubborn independence. Home was the four of them gathered around the kitchen table sharing a meal and planning their weekend, arguing good-naturedly about which movie to watch later. Isabella, Emma said as they were cleaning up after dinner. Can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. Do you think my mama would like our family? The question caught Isabella off guard, and she felt her throat tighten with emotion. In all their conversations about the future, they had rarely discussed Sarah Cole, the woman whose absence had made their family possible. I think, Isabella said carefully, your mama would love seeing how happy you are. I think she would love knowing that your daddy has people who care about him and help take care of both of you. She always said that families come in all different shapes, Emma said matter-of-factly. She said the important thing isn't what your family looks like, it's how much love there is inside it. Isabella glanced at Ethan, who was leaning against the kitchen counter with tears in his eyes. Your mama was very wise, Isabella said softly. I know, Emma replied with the simple confidence of a child who had been well loved. That's why I know she would like you and Jonathan, because you love us a lot. Later that night, after Emma had been tucked into bed with a story about a family of adventurers who traveled the world together, the three adults found themselves in the living room sharing a bottle of wine and marveling at the day's conversations. I can't believe we're really doing this, Isabella said, curled up next to Jonathan on the couch. Having second thoughts? Ethan asked from his recliner, his tone carefully neutral. "No," Isabella replied immediately. "Not second thoughts. Just amazement, I guess. A month ago, I couldn't have imagined this life. Now I can't imagine any other life." "It's going to be complicated," Jonathan pointed out. "Legally, financially, socially. People are going to have questions we don't have easy answers for." "Let them have questions," Ethan said with more confidence than Isabella had heard from him in weeks. "We know who we are. We know what we mean to each other. That's what matters." Isabella looked around the room, taking in the sight of Jonathan's law books stacked next to Emma's coloring books on the coffee table, Ethan's physical therapy equipment sharing space with her own work laptop on the side table. The detritus of three separate lives that had somehow become one cohesive whole. "There's something else we need to talk about," she said, an idea that had been forming all day finally crystallizing into words. Both men looked at her expectantly. "Emma's teacher wants to meet with her parents," Isabella said. "All of her parents. She's been telling everyone at school that she has 3 parents who love her and take care of her." "And," Jonathan prompted, "and I think she's right. I think we should make it official." Ethan frowned. "Make what official? I think Jonathan and I should adopt Emma, not replace you," she added quickly, seeing alarm flash in Ethan's eyes. "Join you. Make it legal that she has 3 parents who are committed to her well-being." The suggestion hung in the air for several seconds while both men processed its implications. "Is that even possible?" Ethan asked finally. "I don't know," Jonathan admitted, "but I know some family law attorneys who could find out." "It would mean that if something happened to you," Isabella said to Ethan, "Emma wouldn't have to go into the foster system. It would mean Jonathan and I would have legal standing to make medical decisions or school decisions if you weren't available. It would mean that in the eyes of the law, we really are her family." Ethan was quiet for a long time, staring into his wine glass as he considered the proposal. Isabella found herself holding her breath, suddenly terrified that she had overstepped some invisible boundary. "She would still be my daughter," he said finally. "She would always be your daughter first," Isabella assured him. "But she would also be ours. And if we did this, if we made it legal, there's no going back. No changing our minds in 6 months or a year when the novelty wears off." "Good," Jonathan said firmly, "because the novelty isn't going to wear off. If anything, I suspect we're going to fall deeper in love with this family every day." Ethan looked up at them both, and Isabella saw the exact moment when his last walls of resistance crumbled. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let's make it official." Emma appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, apparently having heard the sound of conversation even though they thought she was asleep. "Are you talking about grown-up stuff?" she asked, patting down the stairs with Mr. Whiskers under her arm. "We're talking about family stuff," Isabella said, opening her arms so Emma could climb onto the couch beside her. "What kind of family stuff?" Isabella looked at Ethan and Jonathan, both of whom nodded encouragingly. "We're talking about making it official that we're all family together," Isabella explained. "Not just living in the same house, but legally being a family." Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "Like adoption, like in the movies." "Something like that," Jonathan said. "Would I get to keep my same name?" "If you wanted to," Ethan assured her. "Would you still be my daddy?" "Always," Ethan said firmly. Emma nodded, apparently satisfied with these answers. "Okay. Can we do it soon? I want to tell Mrs. Henderson that it's official." Isabella laughed, struck by the child's practical approach to what the adults had been treating as an enormously complex emotional decision. "We'll start the paperwork this week," she promised. As they tucked Emma back into bed for the second time that night, Isabella felt a sense of completeness that she had never experienced before. Not the temporary satisfaction of achieving a goal or solving a problem, but the deep, abiding contentment of being exactly where she belonged. Standing in the hallway outside Emma's room, listening to the little girl's breathing settle into the rhythm of sleep, Isabella realized that their family had been born the moment Ethan threw himself between her and Marcus Reeves's bullets. Everything since then had just been the process of recognizing what already existed. Tomorrow, they would call family law attorneys and begin the legal process of making official what their hearts had already decided. Tomorrow, they would start the complicated work of blending 3 separate lives into one cohesive family unit, with all the challenges and joys that would entail. But tonight, in the quiet of their shared home with Emma safe in her bed, and Ethan's recovery progressing steadily, Isabella allowed herself to simply rest in the certainty that they had found something precious and rare and worth protecting. Love, it turned out, really didn't have rules, and sometimes the most beautiful families were the ones that formed in the spaces between disaster and healing, between sacrifice and gratitude, between strangers and the people who chose to stay. 6 months later, Isabella stood in the courthouse hallway, smoothing down Emma's new blue dress for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. The 8-year-old was practically vibrating with excitement, her dark hair braided with white ribbons that matched the small bouquet of daisies she clutched in her hands. "Do I look official?" Emma asked, spinning in a circle so her dress flared out around her. "You look perfect," Isabella assured her, though her own stomach was twisted with nerves. After months of paperwork interviews and legal consultations, today was the day their unconventional family would become official in the eyes of the law. Jonathan emerged from the men's room, adjusting his tie with hands that Isabella noticed were slightly unsteady. "Any word from our attorney? She's inside talking to the judge about the final details," Ethan replied, appearing around the corner with 2 cups of coffee from the courthouse vending machine. His left arm moved freely now, the months of physical therapy having restored nearly full range of motion, though Isabella still caught him rubbing his shoulder unconsciously when he was nervous. "Are you scared, Daddy?" Emma asked, looking up at Ethan with the perceptive eyes that seemed to see straight through any adult attempt at hiding anxiety. "A little," Ethan admitted, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. "But it's good scared. Like the feeling you get before your birthday party starts." Emma considered this comparison seriously, then nodded. "I get it. Like excited scared. Exactly like excited scared." Margaret Chen, their family attorney, and no relation to Ethan's surgeon, despite the shared surname, appeared in the hallway with a warm smile that immediately eased some of Isabella's tension. "Ready to make this official?" Margaret asked. "Judge Morrison is waiting for us." They filed into the small family courtroom, their footsteps echoing in the formal space. Isabella had expected something more imposing, but the room felt almost intimate with its warm wood paneling and large windows that let in the spring sunlight. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She smiled at Emma as they approached the bench, clearly charmed by the little girl's barely contained excitement. "Well," Judge Morrison began, looking at the paperwork spread before her. "This is certainly one of the more unique family arrangements I've had the pleasure of reviewing." Isabella felt her heart skip a beat. They had been assured that their case was straightforward, that the joint adoption would be approved without issue, but hearing it described as unique sent a flutter of worry through her chest. "Your Honor," Margaret began, but Judge Morrison held up a hand. "Please let me finish. As I was saying, this is unique, but it's also quite clearly in the best interest of the child involved." She looked directly at Emma, who was standing between Isabella and Jonathan, still clutching her flowers. Emma, do you understand what's happening today? Emma nodded solemnly. Isabella and Jonathan are going to become my parents too. Like adoption, but Daddy gets to stay my daddy, and I get to keep my name and get 2 more parents who love me. And how do you feel about that? I feel like the luckiest kid in the whole world, Emma replied with such sincerity that Isabella heard someone in the small gallery behind them sniffle with emotion. Judge Morrison's smile widened. I think you might be right about that. She turned to address the adults. I've reviewed all the documentation the social worker reports, the character references, and the psychological evaluations. I've also had the opportunity to review the rather remarkable circumstances that brought this family together. Isabella glanced at Ethan, remembering the long conversations with social workers who had struggled to understand how a maintenance worker, a newlywed couple, and a traumatized child had formed such a stable family unit in such a short time. They had answered hundreds of questions about their living arrangements, their financial stability, their long-term plans, and their commitment to Emma's well-being. The court finds that this arrangement is not only in the best interest of the child, but represents a loving, stable family environment that any child would be fortunate to have. Judge Morrison continued. Therefore, I hereby grant the petition for joint adoption. Jonathan and Isabella Blackwood, you are now the legal parents of Emma Rose Cole with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Emma let out a small squeal of joy, jumping up and down before launching herself into Isabella's arms. The flowers scattered as Isabella caught her, holding her tight, as tears of happiness streamed down her face. We did it, Butterfly, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion, as he wrapped his arms around both Isabella and Emma. We're officially a family. Jonathan joined their group embrace, and for a moment they stood in the middle of the courtroom, holding each other, while the judge completed the legal formalities. Isabella could hear Margaret shuffling papers, could sense other people in the courtroom, watching their celebration. But all of that faded into background noise as she focused on the weight of Emma's small body in her arms, and the solid warmth of the 2 men who had become her partners in the most important endeavor of her life. When they finally broke apart, Judge Morrison was holding out the official adoption certificate, her own eyes suspiciously bright. Congratulations, she said warmly. This is what family law is supposed to be about, protecting children and supporting the adults who love them, regardless of how traditional or non-traditional that love might look. Outside the courthouse, they were greeted by Mrs. Patterson, who had become something of an honorary grandmother to Emma over the past months, and several of Isabella and Jonathan's friends, who had gradually come to accept and embrace their unconventional family structure. Pictures, Mrs. Patterson demanded, pulling out her phone. This is a day that needs to be documented properly. As they posed on the courthouse steps, Emma insisting that everyone hold hands, so it was clear they were all connected. Isabella found herself thinking about the wedding photos that had never been taken. Their original wedding celebration had ended in chaos and blood, but this moment felt like the real beginning of their marriage, not just to each other, but to the life they had chosen to build together. What now? Jonathan asked as they walked toward their cars, Emma skipping ahead of them with an energy that seemed inexhaustible. Now we go home, Isabella said, and the word carried a weight and warmth that it had never held before. We go home and we celebrate with the best pizza Chicago has to offer, and we start the rest of our lives as an official family. Home was the townhouse they had purchased outright 6 months earlier, after selling both Isabella's downtown condo and Jonathan's bachelor pad. The legal adoption had required proof of permanent housing, and somehow the act of buying a house together had felt like the final piece of commitment they needed to make their arrangement truly permanent. Emma raced ahead to unlock the front door, her new legal status apparently having given her an extra spring in her step. The house smelled like the chocolate chip cookies Mrs. Patterson had baked that morning, and sunlight streamed through the windows of the living room, where Emma's latest art projects were displayed on the walls, alongside family photos and Jonathan's law degree. "I want to call Grandma and tell her about today," Emma announced, referring to Ethan's mother, who lived in Florida, and had initially been bewildered by their family arrangement, before becoming one of its most enthusiastic supporters. "After pizza," Ethan said, settling into his favorite chair, with the kind of relaxed contentment that had become his normal expression over the past year. "Grandma's going to want to hear every detail, and that could take hours." As if on cue, the doorbell rang, and Emma raced to answer it before any of the adults could stop her. Through the window, Isabella could see their usual pizza delivery driver, a college student named Marcus, whose name had initially made them all uncomfortable, but who had gradually become part of their routine Friday night celebrations. "Hi, Marcus," Emma called through the door before opening it. "Guess what? I got adopted today. Now I have 3 parents." The young man's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "That's awesome, Emma, congratulations." He handed over the pizza boxes with a grin. "This one's on the house. Anyone who gets adopted deserves free pizza." As they sat around the kitchen table sharing their celebratory meal, Isabella found herself looking at each of their faces in turn, marveling at how natural this felt, despite its extraordinary beginnings. Emma was chattering about wanting to invite her entire second-grade class to a party to celebrate her new family status. Jonathan was making notes on his phone about the legal paperwork they would need to update now that the adoption was official. Ethan was listening to Emma's party plans with the indulgent smile of a father who had learned that saying yes to joy was always the right choice. "There's something else we need to talk about," Isabella said, when Emma had finally exhausted her party planning ideas. All 3 faces turned toward her expectantly. "I went to the doctor yesterday for my yearly physical." She continued, feeling her cheeks warm, despite the fact that this was her family, and there should be no embarrassment in sharing medical information. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked, concern immediately creeping into his voice. "Everything's perfect," Isabella assured him quickly. "Better than perfect, actually. I'm pregnant." The silence that followed her announcement was profound. Emma's mouth fell open, a piece of pizza halfway to her lips. Jonathan's eyes went wide with shock, and what looked like the beginning of tears. Ethan simply stared at her, processing the implications of her news. "Pregnant?" Emma was the first to find her voice. "Like with a baby." "Like with a baby," Isabella confirmed, laughing at the child's incredulous tone. Emma let out a shriek of pure joy that probably violated several noise ordinances. "I'm going to be a big sister, a real big sister." She launched herself out of her chair and into Isabella's lap, wrapping her small arms around Isabella's neck and hugging her with fierce enthusiasm. "When?" Jonathan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The doctor thinks I'm about 8 weeks along," Isabella replied. "So, sometime in early December." "December," Ethan repeated slowly, as if testing the word. "A Christmas baby." "The best Christmas present ever," Emma declared with the authority of someone who had strong opinions about gift-giving occasions. Over the next several hours, as the reality of Isabella's pregnancy sank in, the conversation turned to practical matters. The townhouse had 4 bedrooms, so space wouldn't be an issue, but they would need to think about childcare arrangements, financial planning, and how to prepare Emma for the realities of sharing attention with a newborn. But underneath all the logistics, Isabella could sense the deeper emotional shifts happening for each of them. For Emma, this pregnancy represented the ultimate confirmation that their family was permanent and growing. For Jonathan, it was the realization of dreams he had put on hold during the chaos of the past year. For Ethan, it was perhaps the most complex another child to love and protect, but also proof that their unconventional family could create new life and new possibilities. "Are you okay with this?" Isabella asked Ethan later that evening, after Emma had been put to bed, with promises that they would start shopping for baby clothes the very next day. They were sitting on the back porch watching the sun set over their small garden, where Emma had planted sunflowers and tomatoes with Mrs. Patterson's help. "Am I okay with it?" Ethan repeated, considering the question seriously. "Isabella, a year ago, I was a single father, barely keeping his head above water, working whatever jobs I could find and counting every penny. Now I'm part of a family that's stable and loving and growing. This baby is going to have 3 parents who adore them, and a big sister who's already planning their birthday parties. How could I be anything but thrilled? Even though it's not biologically your child." Ethan turned to look at her with surprise. "Emma isn't biologically Jonathan's child either, but I've watched him become her father in every way that matters. Biology is just genetics, Isabella. Family is choice." Jonathan joined them on the porch carrying 3 glasses of the sparkling cider they'd opened to celebrate the day's events. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, settling into the chair between Isabella and Ethan. "We were talking about how the baby will fit into our family dynamic," Isabella explained. "The same way Emma fit in," Jonathan said without hesitation. "With lots of love and probably very little sleep." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. The neighborhood around them was settling into its evening routine, children being called in from play, porch lights flickering on the distant sound of televisions and radios, creating a gentle background soundtrack to suburban life. "Do you ever think about that day?" Isabella asked suddenly. "The wedding." Both men knew immediately what she meant. They had talked about the shooting in the months that followed, processing the trauma with therapists and each other, but it wasn't a subject they returned to often. "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. "Usually when I'm having a particularly good day like today. I think about how none of this would have happened if I hadn't been working at that hotel, if I hadn't seen Marcus through the window, if I hadn't decided to do something about it." "Do you regret it?" Jonathan asked quietly. "The getting shot part? Yes, absolutely. I don't recommend taking bullets as a recreational activity." Ethan's joke drew small smiles from Isabella and Jonathan. "But everything that came after, never. Not for a single second." "Marcus is getting out of prison next year," Isabella said, sharing information she'd received from the victim's advocate, who kept her updated on the legal proceedings. "His lawyer says he wants to write us a letter of apology." "How do you feel about that?" Jonathan asked. Isabella considered the question. Marcus Reeves had pleaded guilty to attempted murder and several other charges, accepting a plea deal that would see him serve 7 years in prison, followed by supervised probation. She had testified at his sentencing hearing, describing the terror of that day, but also speaking about the unexpected blessing that had emerged from his violent actions. "I think forgiveness might be good for all of us," she said finally. "Not forgetting and not excusing what he did, but letting go of the anger. It's taken up enough space in our lives." "Emma asked me about him last month," Ethan said. "She wanted to know if the man who hurt me was a bad person, or just a person who did a bad thing." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that people are complicated, and that hurt people sometimes hurt other people, and that understanding that doesn't mean we accept it or allow it to continue." Ethan took a sip of his cider. "I also told her that sometimes the worst things that happen to us end up leading to the best things in our lives." As if summoned by their conversation about her, Emma appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, Mr. Whiskers tucked under her arm. "I can't sleep," she announced. "I'm too excited about everything." Come here, butterfly, Ethan said, patting his lap. Emma settled into her father's embrace, but her attention was focused on Isabella's still flat stomach. When will the baby start kicking? She asked. Not for a few more months, Isabella replied. But when they do, you'll be the first person I tell. And when they're born, I'll help take care of them, right? I'll be the best big sister ever. You'll be an amazing big sister, Jonathan assured her. The baby is going to be so lucky to have you. Emma nodded solemnly, apparently satisfied with this confirmation of her future role. She yawned, the excitement of the day finally catching up with her. Can I sleep out here tonight? She asked. Under the stars. Isabella started to point out that it was too cold, that she didn't have proper sleeping arrangements, that sleeping outside on a school night wasn't practical, but Ethan was already standing up with Emma in his arms. How about we drag some blankets out here and look at stars for a little while before going back inside, he suggested. 20 minutes later, they were all lying on their backs on blankets spread across the porch, looking up at the clear night sky. Emma was nestled between Isabella and Ethan, pointing out constellations she had learned about in school, while Jonathan identified the few bright stars visible despite the city's light pollution. There's the Big Dipper, Emma said, tracing its outline with her finger. And there's that other one that looks like a person. Orion, Jonathan supplied. The hunter. What's he hunting? In the stories, he was hunting all sorts of things, but I like to think he's hunting for something good, like happiness or the perfect family. Emma giggled. That's silly. You don't have to hunt for family. Family finds you. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes at the simple wisdom in Emma's words. Family finds you. It was such a perfect description of how their lives had intersected, not through careful planning or logical decision-making, but through a series of circumstances that had seemed tragic at the time, but had ultimately brought them exactly what they all needed. You're right, sweetheart, Isabella said softly. Family does find you, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. As Emma's breathing gradually evened out into the rhythm of sleep, the three adults remained lying under the stars, each lost in their own thoughts about the day's events and the future stretching ahead of them. Are we ready for this? Jonathan asked quietly. His question encompassing not just the pregnancy, but all of it, the legal responsibility, the financial obligations, the emotional complexity of raising children together in a non-traditional family structure. I don't think anyone's ever ready, Ethan replied. But I think we're as ready as anyone can be. Isabella thought about all the ways their lives had changed in the 14 months since that terrible and wonderful day at the Riverside Manor. They had learned to navigate the practical challenges of blended schedules and shared responsibilities. They had developed their own family traditions and inside jokes and ways of communicating that required no words. They had weathered Emma's nightmares and Ethan's recovery, and the skeptical questions of well-meaning friends and family members. Most importantly, they had learned to trust each other with the most precious things in their lives, their hearts, their hopes, their children, their future. I love you both, Isabella said into the darkness, the words carrying the weight of gratitude and commitment and wonder at how completely her life had been transformed. We love you too, Ethan replied, and Jonathan's murmured agreement created a harmony that seemed to blend with the night sounds around them. They eventually carried Emma inside and tucked her into her own bed, where she immediately curled up with Mr. Whiskers and fell back into deep sleep. In the hallway outside her room, the three adults paused to look at the family photos lining the walls. Pictures from Emma's school events, holiday celebrations, ordinary Sunday afternoons that had become precious because they were shared. In the center of the display was the formal portrait they'd had taken 6 months after moving into the townhouse. In it, Emma sat between Isabella and Jonathan on a park bench, while Ethan stood behind them, his hands resting on Isabella's shoulders. They were all smiling, but it wasn't the forced smile of a posed photograph. It was the natural, easy joy of people who had found their place in the world. "Sweet dreams, butterfly," Ethan whispered, pulling Emma's door almost closed. In their bedroom, the master suite that all three adults shared in the most practical and loving arrangement they could devise, Isabella lay between Jonathan and Ethan, her hand resting on her still flat stomach where new life was growing. Jonathan's arm was draped over her waist, and Ethan's steady breathing indicated he had fallen asleep almost immediately. This was their life now. Unconventional, complicated, born from tragedy, but sustained by choice and commitment, and the daily decision to keep choosing each other. In 7 months, there would be a baby to add to their family constellation. In the years to come, there would be graduations and heartbreaks and celebrations and challenges that they couldn't even imagine yet. But lying there in the darkness, surrounded by the people who had become her entire world, Isabella felt a peace and certainty that she had never experienced before. They were ready for whatever came next because they would face it together. Outside Chicago settled into another night, unaware that in one townhouse on a quiet residential street, a family forged from bullets and healing, and the radical decision to love without limits was dreaming of the future. It was a future that began with a single father's split-second choice to save strangers, continued with those strangers' decision to save him in return, and would extend forward into all the beautiful, messy, ordinary, extraordinary moments that make up a life lived in service to love. Emma stirred in her sleep down the hall, probably dreaming of baby bottles and birthday parties and all the ways she would help care for her new sibling. In the guest room that had become Jonathan's home office, adoption papers and baby books shared shelf space with legal briefs and family photographs. And in the master bedroom, 3 adults who had learned that the best families are the ones you choose held each other close and dreamed of the child who would soon complete their circle. Another small miracle born from the truth that sometimes the scariest moments of our lives are actually the moments when everything we never knew we needed finally finds us. The last thing Isabella remembered before sleep claimed her was Emma's voice from earlier that evening. "Family finds you." It had found them all right, in the most unexpected, beautiful, perfect way imaginable.